These slots here on this motherboard, there are only 3, and they are called the expansion slots.
If you work with computers, you've likely heard terms like RAM, hard drive, and processor mentioned by tech support or others who are more interested in what goes on inside of a computer's case. If you've always wondered what the various components of your computer are for, but have never really had the time to look into it, then this video is just for you. While each one of these components is complex enough to spend a lifetime learning about, I'm going to give a very broad and general overview. A typical desktop computer comes down to these 7 essential parts: case, power supply, motherboard, CPU, RAM, hard drive, and graphics cards. These are the fundamental parts of any desktop computer. It may seem daunting at first, so let's separate these into 2 categories: simple ones and the more complex ones. For starters, let's look at the case. The case is nothing more than a big hunk of plastic that houses everything else. Some of them have more or less physical space, some of them have different parts where you can put screws in or this or that, but at the end of the day, all the case really does is provide a nice enclosed system for everything else. Next up, we have the power supply. This part of your computer, almost always located on the bottom, is the part that plugs into the wall and provides all of the other parts with the electricity needed to do their thing. You can think of it as an extremely advanced AC adapter. The last of the simple parts to mention is the motherboard. The motherboard is a wide and flat circuit board that all of the other components plug into. It's the part that lets all of these components send electrical currents, composing data, between each other. While not particularly expensive, the motherboard is arguably the most important component because without it, you'd have nowhere to put anything else. So that's it for the simple components. Now let's move on to the more complex parts, the ones that deal with data. The 4 main components to keep in mind here are CPU, RAM, hard drive, and graphics card. Now first things first, I'm going to establish some terminology. Keep in mind that CPU is also known as the Central Processing Unit, or processor. These terms all refer to the same thing. They're completely interchangeable. RAM stands for Random Access Memory and is often referred to as just memory. A hard drive is often referred to as a disk drive or storage. And a graphics card is also known as a GPU or graphics processing unit. For this explanation, I'll be using the terms CPU, RAM, hard drive, and graphics card. So let's start with the CPU. The CPU is where your computer does things. It isn't really capable of storing very much data at all, but it's very good at doing things with data. Quickly reading it, arranging it, doing the type of quick and massive calculations needed to run your programs. This is where most of your programs are essentially run from. It's often referred to as the brain of the computer. It's the center part of your computer's brain. Basically, everything that happens in your computer goes through your CPU at some point. Now let's talk about RAM and hard drive at the same time, because they have a very unique relationship, which is probably why people often confuse the two. Your hard drive is where all of your data is stored. When your computer tells you you're running low on space, it's because your hard drive is almost full. All of the data that makes up your videos, pictures, documents, project files, or the 3D worlds and models that make up a game are all stored here. While hard drives can store lots of data, they're relatively bad at accessing that data quickly. Everything is accessed through a tiny little wire here, and because most hard drives are made up of spinning disks, your hard drive isn't going to be able to constantly give your CPU the information it needs to run certain programs. That's where RAM comes in. RAM is another form of storage. It stores the exact same kind of data as your hard drive, but RAM sacrifices storage space for nearly instant accessibility. Unlike your hard drive, which sends all of its data through a tiny little thin wire, your RAM is arranged in these long, thin sticks that insert into your motherboard. Think about a storage unit. If you have a massive warehouse with only a thin doorway, it's going to be difficult to get in, find what you need, and get out if it's kind of spread all over the place. You'll have to go through a tiny door. But if you have a long, wide storage shed that's got a big, massive garage composing an entire side of it, you won't be able to store as much, but things are significantly easier to get to. Typically, if your computer has 1,000 gigabytes of storage space in your hard drive, It's likely got about 16 gigabytes worth of RAM. Here's where you put the stuff you own but you aren't currently using, and this smaller one is where you put the stuff that you are using and need to be able to get in and out of quickly. When you run a program or a project file, your CPU identifies what parts of data are needed for that program to run, it pulls them from your hard drive, and then it stores them in your RAM sticks for quick accessibility. This is why when you start a new level of a game, for instance, it has to load. Anytime you see loading, it's loading the data that composes that level from your bulky hard drive into your RAM. From a user's perspective, just follow this rule of thumb. RAM allows you to run intensive programs, while disk space allows you to have more of these programs installed. It also allows you to have more of the data they're referencing, whether it be pictures, videos, or mods. And finally, we get to the graphics card. With all of the calculations going on in your computer to turn a bunch of numbers that basically come down to ones and zeros into a constantly updated three-dimensional world, the final and most important and arguably most difficult step is to display that on your monitor. It's possible for your motherboard to do this alone, but it's not going to look good, and it's certainly not going to be able to do much. Your graphics card is essentially an entire computer in and of itself, dedicated to the sole task of figuring out what pixels need to light up on your screen, in what color, and at what time. If you were playing a game that had a very busy and high texture world with lots of models and different angles and colors, your CPU is the thing that creates that world. It knows where the stuff is, and it does so with data that's been stored in your RAM, which was loaded out of your hard drive, but it's your graphics card that figures out what it's supposed to look like based on where you're standing in the world. Without getting too off topic here, if you're somebody who likes math, I highly recommend you look up fast inverse square root, which is directly related to how three-dimensional worlds calculate perspectives. So that pretty much sums it up. There are other components worth mentioning, such as cooling systems or internal wireless cards, but really those are extras. So to summarize what I talked about so far, the case stores everything in a physical box, the power supply gives electricity to what needs it, the motherboard is the body that everything plugs into, the CPU does everything, RAM stores data that is needed for quick access, hard drives store everything that you have installed and the data that goes along with those programs, while the graphics card figures out how it's all supposed to look on your monitor. Well, thank you very much for watching. I hope I helped, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment, and I'll do my best to answer them.
All right, good morning. I want to welcome you all back to class, and we are still studying on the computer hardware. And we have learned that computer hardware refers to all the physical parts of a computer system. All the physical parts of a computer system. That is a definition for hardware. Anytime you are asked to define hardware, it means all the physical parts of a computer system. Alright. Computer hardware refers to all the physical parts of a computer system. Sometimes we add that you can see and what? And touch. Sometimes we add that, but it is important to know the definition of computer hardware. And every computer student, whether you're a technician, an engineer or not, you are supposed to know computer hardware, because hardware directly affects software. Software and hardware work together, they work hand in hand. So if you don't learn the basics of hardware like what we are doing, you can't really understand computers. You can't really be a good computer literate. So that is what we hope to achieve. We've been talking about the motherboard, and we've looked at some of the key subcomponents on the motherboard itself. We talked about the CPU socket, we talked about the RAM slots, we've talked about the north bridge, we've talked about the south bridge, we've talked about the CMOS battery, we've talked about the BIOS chip. Please, have you seen the BIOS chip? Yes, so on every motherboard, the BIOS chip is somewhere. The BIOS chip is not located at the same spot or the same position on every motherboard. On every motherboard, it has its location. So if you don't know where it is, you need to find it. If there are other similar chips that confuses you, you need to you can visit the manufacturer's website and get the labeling of that particular motherboard you are looking at, and you can see the location of your BIOS chip. And we said the BIOS chip is the same as a ROM, and we said ROM stands for what? ROM stands for read-only memory. I like the way you are learning. If you can learn all the components like this, you are going to be very good. Now, I don't want you to forget anything we learn here, because you are going to present on all of them. Today we want to elaborate a little bit more about the expansion slots, and we will talk about the SATA connectors. Then we will talk about the IO ports. All these ports here are called input output ports, or IO ports, such as the VGA ports. We have USB ports, we have audio ports, we have Ethernet ports, and sometimes we have additional ports like the HDMI. Today HDMI is important. I shouldn't even mention VGA, because HDMI is more important than VGA today in modern computers. But in older computers, all of them have the VGA, and modern computers have the HDMI. Even though they do the same things, modern computers prefer the HDMI to the VGA. We also have another port here called the DVI port, and we'll look at so many ports, and we will learn everything we need to know about the motherboard, and we move on to other components. Without wasting much time, I want us to get right into the lesson. All right, today we want to start our studies by talking about the expansion slots. We are talking about the expansion slots. These slots here on this motherboard, there are only 3, and they are called the expansion slots. You have to understand that the expansion slot has several slots, and each one has a name. Each one has a name, and you are expected to know the name. On older computers, this is the most famous slot you will find, but today this particular slot is out of the system or has been discontinued. They are no longer making this particular one, and you can tell by looking at how it looks like. At least you can see that it looks different from this. Not only is it shorter than this one, you can see how the spaces provided within look like, and how the shape looks like. When I give you a card like this, by looking at the chip on the card here, you will know immediately that this cannot be put in a PCI Express slot. It will never fit in a PCI Express. It will never fit in. So when you see a card like this, first of all, you should know that, oh, this looks like PCI. So the first thing to understand is that this slot is called a Pci slot. It is very famous, it is very popular, but it has been discontinued. Because information technology and computing is advancing at a rapid rate, there are certain components that exist today, but tomorrow they are out of the system. For example, even our hard drives are going out of the system, and newer things are coming. Some years ago, these things were the main things. Like this particular connector here, it is out of the system now. Modern computers are no longer having it, and things will change. In the next 5 years, a number of things will change. Are you with me? So this particular slot, don't forget it. It is called the Pci slot. The Pci slot. So when I see this, I can know immediately that is for the Pci slot. So when I connect this, you see that it fits in perfectly. Now, when you look behind the motherboard, like what is showing in this video on the screen, what is showing on the screen, these things you see here are called the input-output ports. They appear behind the system unit. They appear behind what? They appear behind the system unit. And they are there for external connections. So anytime an external connection needs to be made on the computer, or anytime something external is supposed to be connected to the computer system, it is connected through the I/O port. You always have to go behind the motherboard and connect whatever you want to connect. And these are the ports you can connect whatever you need to connect to. Now, when you connect anything onto the PCI slot, the PCI slot over here, you can see that it brings the ports behind the motherboard like the rest. And so whatever you need to connect will be connected to it, and it will show behind the computer system or the system unit. Please, are you following me? All right. I said the name of this slot is called what? It's called a PCI slot. Please don't forget it. It's called a PCI slot. Because computer components are advancing in terms of speed and the ability to process information, older technologies are not able to support newer technologies. And so we are always finding ways to improve upon them. After the PCI slot, a special slot was created for computer video cards or graphics cards. And that particular slot was designed to help the computer display appear better, and was also dedicated to graphics cards. Remember, the PCI slot is for every other card. For example, the card I showed you here, if I ask you to tell me the name of this card, you don't have to worry about the name. Just look behind here, and whatever you see, that is the name. Now, when you are asked to identify any card, you can tell by looking at the ports that are behind the card. By looking at this, what do you see? What kind of ports do you see? You see USB, right? So you can call this a USB card. When you see audio ports, then you know that it's a sound card. Sometimes you cannot tell by taking a card and studying how the circuit board looks like. You can't tell. Sometimes you can tell by just looking at this. So the next card here, as a beginner, it may be hard for you to tell what this is. But if you can identify the port here, you will know what it is. I'm not saying that the name of the port tells us, or the name of the port. I'm not saying the name of the port is the name of the card. But what I'm saying is that by looking at the port, you can know the type of card. When I see these ports, maybe you have not learned them yet, we'll be looking at them. This is called a DVI port. This is HDMI port. This is the DVI port, and this is called the what? HDMI port. When it comes to computer display, today this is the most powerful port. HDMI. It stands for High Definition Multimedia Interface. If you connect to this HDMI, your display will be very sharp. And so by looking at the ports here, I see HDMI, I see DVI, I already know that this is a graphics card. Are you with me? I know that it's a graphics card. If it's a network card, you are going to see an Ethernet port. So the port will give you a clue as to what card it is. Now, when you look at the chip area of this card, you will see that this was not designed for the PCI slot. Please, are you following? This was not designed for the PCI slot. Now, I told you that after PCI, another slot was created or designed or manufactured just for graphics cards. Now, that particular slot didn't last long because a better one came. Today we'll be talking more about the better one. The name of that slot is the Agp slot. The Agp slot. Agp stands for Accelerated Graphics Port. So that particular slot was designed for graphics cards. The Agp slot looks like the PCI Express, but it is not the same. When you see it, you will know that it's Agp. The Agp is also discontinued, and today we have the modern one here called Pci Express. So I said the white one here is called what? PCI. Sometimes it is blue in color, most of the time it is white. Then this one here is called Pci Express. The Pci Express comes in 4 types. Based on the length of the slots, there are 4 types. This one we see here is the longest one, and so when you see any card, any graphics card or any card with a long chip like this, you know that it is for the PCI Express. Now, the long one here is called the PCI Express by 16 or X16. PCI Express what? By 16. All right, so I know you people here cannot see this particular motherboard here, but you can see that this long slot here is called the PCI Express X16, and what I'm showing you here on the screen is in blue color. It's in light blue. It's the same here. Sometimes you see them in different colors, blue, black, sometimes yellow. But when you see PCI Express, it is unique. It doesn't look like PCI. Obviously, when I see this, I can't see PCI and say that it is PCI Express. That same way, when you see the Agp, you can tell. You can tell this one is PCI Express. There are smaller ones. So on this motherboard, you can see that this one here is called PCI Express by 1, the shorter one. And very soon I'm going to show you some graphics cards that will be connected to the small PCI Express by 1 slot. Okay, so when you look at this graphics card on the screen here, you will see that this is PCI Express by 16. And when you look at this sound card, this will also be connected to PCI Express by 1. All right, so don't forget the names of these slots. We'll get into the cards themselves later, but remember that this is PCI Express, this is PCI. The PCI Express, I said they are in 4 types. We have by 16, by 8, by 4, and by 1. Keep that in mind. All right, so these are the expansion slots. Now, the expansion slots, what do we use them for? The expansion slots are there to connect to expansion cards. So over here on the note, it says that expansion slots allow expansion cards such as graphics cards, network cards, and sound cards to be connected to the motherboard. There are different standards of expansion slots such as PCI, Agp, and PCI Express. Keep these 3 in mind. Even though Agp is discontinued, PCI is discontinued, you may encounter it. There are some older slots like the ISA slots that we are not talking about because you may never encounter the ISA slot. But PCI, Agp, and PCI Express, you have to be able to identify. So over here we have 2. You can tell this is a famous PCI and this is also the famous PCI Express. Is that okay? Wonderful. Now let's move on to the SATA connectors. Let's move on to the SATA connectors. So on this diagram, you can see the SATA connectors over here, and on this particular motherboard, you can see the SATA connectors. Please, can you see well? Come closer. Can you see them? Can you people see them? So 1, 2, 3, 4. Please, can you see 1, 2, 3, 4? Are you sure you can see? All right, that's very good. That's very good. That's very good. All right. Now, these are called the SATA connectors or SATA data connectors. Now, someone will ask, the SATA connector, what do we use it for? When you look here, we have a SATA data cable, and this SATA data cable is connected to the SATA connectors or any of the SATA connectors. Please, have you seen this? Now the other end goes into a drive, and it can be connected to either an optical drive. So when you see an optical disk drive like this, you will know that this is a SATA optical disk drive. It's a SATA type because of the connectors here. And so this particular cable should be able to connect to it without a problem. And I told you that all drives need two connections, one for power and one for what? Data. So this is where the data is connected to, and it comes directly onto the motherboard. So there are wires in this particular cable that allows communication for reading and writing. So when there is an optical disc here, or a CD or DVD, through this cable we are able to read what is on it. It's connected directly onto the motherboard. The CPU will be able to access the information through this cable. Please, are you with me? When data needs to be stored or written, it is also through this cable. This cable is slim because it uses a serial, or it is a serial cable. Hello. This cable is slim because it is a serial cable. When you go inside, you may find about 4 wires, and each wire does a specific thing. Are you with me? So there are several functions like reading, writing, and other things. So each wire is dedicated to something in particular. Now, I said it is slim because it is a serial cable and it operates with a serial method. The other one that is wide like this is wide because it is a parallel cable and operates in a parallel method. When we talk about serial and parallel, this is what it means. Serial operates in series. Serial operates in what? Keep that in mind. Serial operates in what?
Series.
Parallel operates simultaneously. If you take a parallel, or you see anything that is called parallel, it means it is wide and data is transmitted in a parallel form. Did you learn about parallel or parallelogram or anything in parallel? Okay, so data operates in parallel form. That means several bits of data can be transferred at the same time simultaneously. So parallel operates in a simultaneous form. Serial operates in a series form. With series or with serial, one bit is transmitted at a time, so they follow each other in a straight line. Series operate like this, parallel operates in parallel. Are you with me? So in IT, anything that is serial will be small. Someone may think that parallel should do better than serial, but when it comes to our drives, such as our optical disk drive and our hard drive, the serial has won the race. Today, serial can transmit about 100 times faster than the parallel. So we have discontinued the parallel, which is the Parallel Advanced Technology Attachment, that is PATA, and we are using the Serial Advanced Technology Attachment, SATA. Are you with me? So this is a SATA optical disk drive. We can also have a SATA hard drive, like this hard drive. When you see the connectors here, you can tell immediately, is it PATA or SATA? Pardon? It's SATA. You can tell by how the connectors look like. The PATA, which is also known as IDE, is very obvious. I said it's very hot. When you see this, you can tell. Can't you tell? This and this one. Look at the connectors here. Are they similar? You can tell. It is very, very obvious, right? Yeah. So this one is a PATA hard drive or an IDE hard drive. So this is the SATA data connector, and it has to be connected to a SATA drive, either a hard disk drive or an optical disk drive. Is that okay? All right. So right now, by what I have demonstrated, you can immediately tell the function of the SATA connectors. You can immediately tell the function of the SATA connectors. Before SATA came, we had the PATA. The PATA is also known as IDE. Are you with me? And all our hard drives and our all our hard drives and our optical disk drives were connected with the Parallel Advanced Technology cable, this one, the PATA. So to read data from our hard drive, this is what we used. Please, are you with me? When this connection is done like this, data can be written to and read from this device. Today, we are no longer using this type of connections. And so this one is out of the system today. You still have to learn about it because you may encounter it in examination and other older systems. All right. This cable is a IDE data cable or the PATA data cable. And the SATA has come to replace it. Please, are you with me? I said the SATA has come to do what? Replace it. So the SATA, when you see the connectors here, now you can identify them, right? All right. So from what I have told you so far, what do you think the SATA connectors are for? What do you think they are for? Just tell me in your own words. Excellent. So I don't want you to just read components by what is in a book or the definition. I want you to see practically what it does. So when you see this, don't be confused. This is where our hard drives are connected to, and I just demonstrated it. Please, do you remember? I took a hard drive and I connected it to here, and you can see that it worked. This is how hard drives are connected inside the system unit, and this is the technology for connecting these two devices to be able to access information and to store information. Any information that needs to be stored here can be stored because of this cable. Remember, it also needs power, and it gets the power from where? It gets the power from where? every component gets its power from the power supply unit, so don't be confused about it. It gets the power from the power supply unit. So on the power supply unit, we talked about the SATA power connector. Do you remember we talked about a SATA power connector? That one will come here, and this is for the data. Now, one thing I'm going to tell you which is so important, I don't want you to ever forget, is that this particular hard drive, if I don't connect it to this blue connector, it's not going to work. When I turn on my computer cannot start or boot to my operating system because I connected this to the wrong connector here, or any of these. Please, are you with me? Are you sure you are with me? All right, I'm going to tell you something very important. That's why I said don't forget it. Don't forget it. When it comes to the older technologies, what we used to use around the year 2000, 2005, this was what we had around. You can see that this is where the data cable is connected to. Please, can you see? Can you see? Did it work? And this will go onto the motherboard, right? Excellent. Let me remove it. Over here, what do we connect here? What do we connect here? This is where the Molex power connector is connected to. I told you that every drive needs power and needs what? Data connection. So these two must be connected. This is for the Molex and this is for the data connection, and it uses the Ide data cable. Now, do you see what we have here? Can you see the middle part here? Okay, this middle part is important. It has some small, and this thing I'm going to remove. Today it is not that popular because this technology is out of the system, but this used to be something very, very important. Please, have you seen it? Have you seen this? Hello. This thing here is placed inside the pins here, and the pins, you can see that there are 5 different sets, and each set has 2 pins. There are 5 of them like this. I can remove it from here and connect it here, and when I connect it here, I have changed something. Please pay attention. When I remove this and I connect it here, I have changed something. Please, can you see? So all those 5 pins, they stand for something. Let me start by telling you what this is called. This is called a jumper. Jumper. It's called a jumper. And over here, we use these pins here for what is called the jumper settings. Now, this particular jumper is designed to connect electric currents. Let me put it in another way. It's designed to create electrical connection. You can see that these pins here are separated. When I connect it to any of the 2 here, it means I've connected those 2 pins together, because inside the jumper there's a connection to hold the 2, or to allow the 2 to communicate. So in older drives such as hard drives and optical disk drives, we do jumper settings, because sometimes you may want to connect 2 hard drives into the same computer. When you do that, the computer needs to know, especially when it is starting, when it is booting, it needs to know which hard drive has the operating system, or which hard drive it is supposed to boot to. You have to tell the computer which hard drive to boot to. So because of that, we have something we call master and slave. We have something we call what?
Master and slave.
Please, I said because of that, we have something we call master and slave. When you look behind this drive, you can see something. What is written there? Slave and what? Master. Is it showing in the camera? Do you see slave and master?
No, yes. It's not showing.
Yes.
Do you see slave and master?
Yes.
You can see. All right. So this particular hard drive can be the slave or the master. The master means it is the main hard drive that the operating system is on, and so the computer should boot onto this hard drive. The slave is just an additional hard drive to store data, but the slave may or may not have the operating system. Usually does not have any operating system. But even if there's an operating system on the slave hard drive, the computer needs to be instructed as to which hard drive it is supposed to boot to. And so we use jumper settings to tell which hard drive is a master and which one is slave. To make this hard drive the master, I need to follow the instructions I see here. I see CS for cable select, I see slave, and I see master. So where you see the master is in the middle. That means I will take my jumper and connect it to the middle. When I connect it to the middle like this, it means this drive is a master. If I do this, my second hard drive cannot also be master. We can't have two masters in the same machine. In the second hard drive, I need to pick it and check the jumper settings. I need to pick it and check the jumper settings. Every IDE hard drive has a jumper setting, and it does not mean they are all the same. The fact that this one master is in the middle does not mean every drive has the middle as master. You need to check the jumper settings. So where they tell you to slot for master, that is where you take your jumper and connect. So if this hard drive is my second hard drive, I will not connect it here as master. I'll connect it to where the slave is, and so I'll connect it here. This one means it's slave. Are you with me? What is the purpose of master and slave? It's all about which hard drive contains the operating system, because the operating system is what will start the entire computer. Which hard drive is the master for the operating system to boot, or which hard drive is the master that has the operating system the entire computer will use? That is extremely important. So we use jumpers to tell which one is master. It's very easy. Now when you come to the cable, you can connect this cable here, the Ide data cable or the Pci data cable here, and connect the other end to the motherboard. If it is an optical disk drive too, you can connect it. The cable, the data cable, doesn't care which one is master or slave. You can just connect it to any of them. And this cable, I can turn it this way and connect it to the motherboard here. Sorry. And connect it to the motherboard here, and it's going to work. I can turn it the other way around and it will still work. Please, are you with me? I can send this part to the drive and bring this part here, and it will still work. SATA is not like that. SATA is different. You can see another one here, right? This is also the same as this, but this one is longer than this. So this particular data cable, when I try connecting it here, it doesn't work because the connector is not as wide as this. What this means is that this is for a different device, like the floppy disk drive. So the floppy disk drive, its data cable will come here, and with that one, the Ide data cable is not as wide as this one. Are you with me? So this small one is for floppy, and this one can be connected to hard drives and optical disk drives. Okay. Now we are talking about the SATA connectors here. Please, can you see the SATA connectors? Okay. With SATA hard drives, we don't have jumper settings. Hello? We don't have what? We don't have jumper settings. What we have are the connectors on the motherboard. The blue one is a special one reserved for the master hard drive. That is why I said when I connect my hard drive to the wrong one, it's not going to work. Because the blue one here is reserved for the master hard drive. So when you are connecting to SATA, you need to know which connector or which port you are connecting to. Please, are you here? When you study these SATA connectors very well, you can see that each one has been labeled. Each one has been what? With this particular one here, when I look inside the motherboard, I can see that they have written SATA 0. And this one here, they've written SATA 1. Over here, they've written SATA 2. And here, they've written SATA 3. The SATA 0 means the master connector for the master hard drive. Okay, what if you have just one hard drive in your computer? Do you still need to select master and slave? You have to still indicate your master. So if it is just one hard drive, still, if you are using the jumpers, still indicate the master. If you are using SATA and you don't connect it to the master connector here, it will not work. Your computer will not start if it's not connected here. So every motherboard has the first SATA connector for the master hard drive. If I have two hard drives, I'll connect the first one here, the master here. I'll connect the second one here. If I have an optical disk drive, I'll connect it here or here. If I have only one hard drive in the system, I'll connect the hard drive here. And I can connect my optical disk drive here. Apart from the master, the rest will work for secondary drives or additional drives, work for additional drives and optical drives. For the optical drives, you can connect it to any of them. So when you are connecting to any machine, you need to check which one is the master, because it is specific. You need to connect to it. Some of them begin from SATA 1, SATA 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Like this motherboard here, there are 6 connectors on it. So you need to know which one is a SATA. The first one. This one says SATA 0. That's the first one. If it begins from 1, then the first one is the master. Very important. The second thing to know about SATA connectors is that, listen to me, when it comes to the cable, please, have you seen this cable? When it comes to the SATA data cable, it is also sensitive. there is one end that needs to go to the motherboard and the other end that needs to go to the device or the drive. When you look at the SATA data cable, you can see that the connectors are different, right? Anytime you see this, please, are you here? It means that the straight part goes onto the motherboard. So you turn it right and connect. The part that looks like the L shape or T shape goes into the device like this, or the drive like this. If you turn it the other way around, you can connect, but it will not work. If you send this part to the motherboard and you bring the other part here, it will connect, but it will not work. This cable is sensitive. It is not like the old one. This one doesn't care how you turn it. It will still work perfectly. With this one, you need to turn it the right way. It is not backward compatible. You need to connect it the right way. This side goes to the motherboard. This side comes to the hard drive or the optical disk drive. So some of them look like this. Please, can you see this? They are different, right? It's just like the blue one I showed you. When you see this, which end goes to the motherboard and which end goes to the drive? Okay, so the one with the straight connector goes to the motherboard and the L-shaped one goes to the drive. Please, have you seen this? When you see this, that's what it means. Okay, now when you see the other type that looks like this, how are you going to tell? Usually, when you see a SATA data cable with the ends straight like this, all the two are the same, the connectors are the same. Usually you will see a sticker like this around one end. On this sticker, they've written something. What do you see? Come and check. What do you see written here?
MB.
Okay. Can you see MB in the video?
No, please. Not yet. It's not sure. It's not sure.
Can you see?
No. Not yet. You have shown.
It's showing.
Partially.
Partially. Can you see MB?
No, please.
You can see.
Yes.
Okay. This MB stands for motherboard. MB stands for what? Hello? MB stands for what? So when you see straight ones like this, most of the time there will be the sticker around one end and they write MB on it. That MB means motherboard. That means that particular end needs to go into the motherboard. Are you with me? Okay, let me prove this to you as well. With this particular one, there's no sticker, but they have done a printing on it. Come and check what is written here.
MB.
You see MB there? Do you see it in the camera?
Yes.
You see MB?
Yes.
All right. So with this one, they have written MB at this end. There is no MB here. There can't be MB here at the other end. Here they've written MB. So when you see MB here, what does it mean? That means this end goes to the motherboard. When it comes to SATA, first of all, you need to know which connector is for the master, and you need to know how to connect the data cable. If you turn the data cable, it won't work. If you connect your hard drive to a different connector, it won't work. So all these things, if you don't know, you connect a computer and it will still not work. Are you with me? With the IDE, it is not that sensitive, but with the SATA, it is extremely sensitive. Are you here? Okay. I think I will skip the ports part because we have a whole lesson on computer ports. So I think I'll skip the ports part for today because there's a whole lesson on ports where we'll learn all the ports. Right after this one, after the main components, we'll talk about the ports and the cables. So for now, we have covered everything on the motherboard that we are supposed to know for now. If you want to be a technician or an engineer, you will go further and learn more things. We talked about the CPU socket, we talked about the RAM slots, we talked about the expansion slots, we talked about the north bridge, we talked about the south bridge, we talked about the 24-pin power connector, we talked about the SATA connectors, we talked about the Ide data connector, we talked about the BIOS chip or the ROM chip or the ROM, we talked about the CMOS battery, and I think you are good to go. These things are called capacitors, right? And see, when you see these things here, these are jumpers. Have you seen that I've removed the jumper? So usually the jumpers are connected to pins. So today you may find jumpers, but you find them on motherboard, and jumpers on the motherboard are there for specific tasks. For example, if this computer has an administrator password on the BIOS, I'm not talking about the user login. On the BIOS, you can put a password on the BIOS. If there's password on the BIOS, no one can enter the BIOS to change settings. If you buy a machine and there's password on the BIOS, you can flash the BIOS. To flash the BIOS, you need to remove this jumper, change the position to the next position. When you see this and you power the machine, immediately it will flash the BIOS. So you can see that it's written an instruction here, clear password. So after doing this, you need to off the machine and remove it again and bring it back to the first position. So these are also called jumpers. Alright, so today we've been able to complete our studies on the motherboard. We have successfully learned what the 24-pin power connector is and what it does, the RAM slots, CMOS battery, the SATA connectors, the south bridge, the expansion slots, the north bridge, the BIOS chip, the CPU sockets, and all the major internal components on the motherboard. Next time we'll move on to other components such as the CPU, the hard drive, SSD, and others, and we have a lot more to learn. So thank you for joining us in this class. I will see you in our next class. Bye.